Welcome back to Nach Yomi. Today we are learning the 8th Perek of Sefer Yehoshua. This is the longer Perek. It has 35 psukim and it has two distinct topics. The first topic is the reconquest of the city of Hai. As you remember, there was an attempt to conquer Hai, and because of the cherem that Achan violated in taking loot from Yericho, there was a failure in the first battle. So now, interestingly enough, as opposed to Yehoshua making his own plans for battle, Hashem tells Yehoshua what to do. Hashem gives very specific instructions, and he changes two things about how this is going to work. Number one, he says, Yehoshua, you're going to conquer the city, but you can now let the people actually use and take from the spoils. Number one. And number two is I want you to make a ambush. We talked about how the beforehand Yehoshua perhaps was a little bit confident or overconfident with the battle of Jericho, and in this way Hashem is saying, don't be so confident. You need to actually do some form of hishtadlus, of some form of investment into this. So Yehoshua does exactly that, and Yehoshua devises a plan. What he does is he takes 5,000 soldiers. Remember, the first battle was 3,000 soldiers, and they fled, and there were a number of casualties. So Yehoshua takes 5,000 soldiers, and he uses them as a decoy. So he sends them closer to the city as if they're about to attack. But in the meantime, he takes a group of 30,000 soldiers and puts them immediately behind the city in a covert way so that the city is unaware of them. What Yehoshua does is then sends the 5,000 towards the city. Now remember, 5,000 is incrementally bigger than 3,000, so it's not like the full battle. So it's not like a terrifying army, but it still looks like they learned their lesson, although not fully, from the perspective of the sentries looking down from the ramparts onto these approaching Israelites. And so that's exactly what happens. What happens is they see the approaching army of the 5,000 from the front. The king of Hai very confidently sends his army out to meet them. Yehoshua brings his army into retreat. So the 5,000 start fleeing. While they flee, all the soldiers of Hai leave the city. And at this point in time, Hashem tells Yehoshua, Hashem interrupts in the middle of the battle and tells Yehoshua to reach out with his spear, with his chidon, and Yehoshua reached out with his spear at the appointed time, and that's the moment where the ambush party in the back knows this is about to happen. They enter the city and they set the city on alight. At which point, the pursuing Hai soldiers turn around, see their city on fire, realize they're being tricked, and now the 5,000 turn around and start the onslaught on the soldiers. So they're caught between their burning city, the Israelite soldiers who just turn around, and the bigger army in their city, which is coming behind them. And they completely decimate the city, kill everybody there, and burn the city down. But Israel do take the spoils. It is interesting to note that the Tanakh tells us there were only 12,000 people killed in Hai, so Hai was certainly not a huge city, but nonetheless it was clearly fortified well and was not conquerable until this point, until a little more tact was placed in the battle. The second topic of our Perek leads us to the last 5 psukim, or last 6 psukim, where Yehoshua makes an altar, a mizbeach at Har Eval, which is deep in Israel towards the area of Shechem, and he writes the entire Torah, he wrote the Torah on the stones, and reads out to all of Israel in front of everybody the Torah and the curses and the blessings which are mentioned in Parshas Re'eh, in front of the entire congregation. So just a few points to think about during this Perek. We'll come back to one or two ideas, and that is that there's this critical moment where Hashem reaches in and says to Yehoshua, lift up your spear as the sun. The words are almost identical to when Hashem tells Moshe to stretch out his hand with his staff over the Yam Suf. It's just such a different image over here that we see in this Perek, and this really differentiates Yehoshua from Moshe in their leadership. Moshe Rabbeinu is told to stretch out his hand, which is, in a certain sense, opens up the most miraculous point in history, where the sea splits. And whereas Yehoshua's stretching out his hand is with a military item, with a spear, which is going to precipitate a ambush, a clearly planned, human-planned ambush, although God instructed, but certainly this is a military strategy. This is the movement from that era of miracles that Moshe Rabbeinu prevailed upon, and Yeshua's leadership, which is about the military and the hishtadlus, the actual work necessary to be done to do this conquest. When it comes to these stones, there are a lot of things to consider. This whole business of the stones is actually talked about in Sefer Devarim Perek Chav Zayin, where Hashem says, on the day that you cross the Jordan, you go write these stones, and then you put the curses and the blessings in Parshas Re'eh, where it talks about it on Har Gerizim and Har Eval, on these two separate mountains. Now, fascinatingly enough, if you read those psukim carefully, it sounds like you're supposed to do that on the day you enter into Israel. And we've met stones before. We saw Yoshua did take stones out of the river and place them there in Gilgal the day they crossed the river. But he did not jump this whole business over here of the stones and this mizbech and reading the whole Torah and writing the Torah. This happens a lot later. So what really happened? Did Yoshua ignore that command? The Mefarshim debate this. One set of Mefarshim say, yeah, well, this event actually occurred earlier, and supernaturally they all walked 60 miles into the land of Israel the day they crossed the Jordan to actually place them there and do this whole procedure. And these 6 psukim are out of chronological order in Tanakh. And the Mefarshim said, no, Yeshua couldn't do that. It wasn't practical then. And Yeshua tried the best he could, which was he took stones at the time we crossed the river. And now he did another set of stones to write the Torah on them when he was able to have access to the Har Gerizim and Har Eval. And the Malbim very carefully sort of divides it up and says, if you look at the psukim in Devarim, there are actually 2 commands. There are commands to create a monument on the day you arrive, and there is another one which is to write the Torah on the stones, and that is not time-bound to the day you arrive. And the Malbim says, therefore, Yeshua fulfilled both segments of it, the monumental stones on the side of the Jordan in Gilgal, and the stones which are really the writing of the entire Torah here on Har Eval and Har Gerizim, which happens a little later in the story. And he fulfilled both parts of that command. Very fascinating insight into the way the Torah is read there. One just very basic question is, how can you write the entire Torah on stones? The Torah takes a long time to write and a big area to write it on. So Rav Saadia Gaon famously says, as quoted in the Radak, that he wrote the numbers, he wrote the headings of all the mitzvahs, of all the commandments, which is of course very fascinating because Rav Saadia Gaon was one of the leaders of that movement of the Moinei HaMitzvahs, the people who counted the mitzvahs. He felt was very important, and he thinks that that's what was going on at this point, historically speaking, as one of the answers. Fascinating idea. In the meantime, we'll leave it here. Have a wonderful and meaningful day.